Hello and welcome to the Clear Voice Podcast, brought to you by Clear Career Professionals. Many municipalities are in budget season right now, and we wanted to bring you a podcast talking all things budgeting. With us today is the president of Clear, Michael Boese. How are you doing today, Michael?
Doing great, James. Really excited to be talking about this topic, especially this time of year. We have a great staff here at Clear, but one of our founding city managers who's been involved in Clear since almost the very beginning, Kelly Kuenstler, is on with us today. We're really excited to talk with her about budgeting. It's one of her specialties, and excited to have the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, welcome to the podcast, Kelly. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. Budget is not always the most exciting topic for many, but for geeks like me, I really enjoy this time of year.
Yeah, it's definitely not my favorite time of the year, but it's very important to get these things done right and make sure that we're providing a good value for the citizens in our jurisdictions. And one of the most important things I think we'd have to talk about first is all the legal and procedural foundations for budgeting. So can you talk to us a little bit about that first?
Sure. Probably what we'll just start with is a Texas Local Government Code compliance. It's actually Chapter 102 of the Texas Local Government Code, and it governs municipal budget law. Things like public notices, hearings, adoption timelines. There's so many requirements in this. First, let me actually just start out by saying this is not meant to be legal advice in any way. It's just some discussion points, the legal and procedural foundations. But you have to have a proposed budget filed at least 30 days before the tax levy. And in the context of municipal budget, a tax levy refers to the total amount of property taxes a city or a local government formally imposes on its residents and businesses to fund public services. It's not the tax rate itself, but it's the actual dollar amount that the municipality plans to collect. You also have to publish a notice of hearing at least 10 to 30 days before the actual hearing. And this must appear in a newspaper. And it also should include a tax increase statement if that is applicable. You have to have a budget hearing at least 15 days after the budget is filed, but before you adopt your tax rate. Public input is allowed at those hearings. Once you've had the budget hearing, a budget adoption is done. This requires a record vote when the council actually adopts the budget or the commissioners. You must post your adopted budget on the city website, and you have to have tax rate details on your post.
Yeah, Kelly, it's interesting working with these communities and kind of what you're talking about, especially medium and smaller size communities who maybe don't have the really robust finance department who is kind of tracking and analyzing the budget throughout the year. Many of these communities are doing AP and collecting the taxes and things like that. It's often difficult to really build in this budget process. And so, as we're moving through these things, I know the truth and taxation requirements are something that's on a lot of folks' minds. And so if you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So the truth and taxation requirements are designed to assure transparency in property tax rate adoption and also to give taxpayers a chance to understand and respond to the proposed increases. Property owners must always be notified of tax rate increases under truth and taxation requirement per the Texas Tax Code. There is the new revenue tax rate, which generates the same amount of revenue as the previous year from properties that were taxed in both years. And then there's the voter approval tax rate. That is the maximum tax rate that's allowed without triggering an election. That was formerly in Texas called the rollback rate. Public hearings are required if the proposed rate exceeds the lower of the two calculated rates.
When we're going through all this budgeting, one of the things that is, I believe, required in Texas is to create a budget calendar that lists all these dates and all these important milestones. You should even put other things that maybe not required by the legal process, but is going to be part of your budgeting process, like meeting with department heads and if you're going to have any kind of public involvement. How important is that budget calendar? Obviously, sometimes we're going to miss deadlines, but how important is it to stick to the budget calendar and get all those things done?
Yeah, the budget calendar is really important. It emphasizes the importance of a clear timeline for departmental submissions, for workshops, public hearings, and then the final adoption before the fiscal year actually begins. So a quick overview of a budget calendar would look April 1st to May 1st. Your chief appraiser in your county sends the notices of the appraised values out. By April 30th, the chief appraiser will certify the estimated taxable values. July 20th to 25th or so, the Appraisal Review Board approves the appraisal records. By September 1st, your taxing unit adopts the budget and publishes the notices. September 30th, or 60 days after receiving the appraisal roll, is a deadline to adopt the tax rate.
Those are important dates, Kelly, and I kind of wanted to really delve into a little bit more about your experience. I know you've had a robust experience in a lot of different government roles, but when we move to revenue considerations, if you could kind of talk a little bit more about what your experience has been with those and maybe some of the things that you've learned over the years that can really help folks out.
Sure. So revenue considerations, there's really four major streams of revenue that I can think of. Your property tax trends are important in revenue considerations because you want to analyze your appraised values, your exemptions, and your rate scenarios so that you can actually forecast those revenues that you're going to, generate from property taxes. Sales tax is another revenue considerations for local government. When you think of sales tax volatility, you want to look at the impact of economic shifts in your community, especially in a retail heavy or a tourism driven town. Another thing that you're looking at when you're looking at your revenue is intergovernmental transfers. This would include like grants, franchise fees. In Texas, franchise fees are payments that are made by utility companies and other service providers to cities for the right to use public property. So maybe for the right to use things such as streets, alleys, rights of way. And what they do is they typically deliver services like gas, telecommunications, maybe cable TV. Another form of revenue that you must consider during a budget are your enterprise funds, if applicable in your local government. When you're doing that, you're reviewing the utility rates and the service fees to ensure self-sufficiency. In Texas municipal budgets, enterprise funds are used to account for operations that are financed and operated in a manner similar to private businesses, where the cost of providing services are primarily recovered through user fees and charges. These funds are distinct from general funds, which are supported by taxes and used for broad governmental functions. Some examples of enterprise fund: your water, your wastewater utilities, solid waste, if your city is in charge of garbage collection and disposal, electric or gas utilities in cities that operate their own, stormwater management fees may be generated from municipal airports, parking facility and garage fees would be applicable in some cities. Golf course fees, if your golf course is owned by your local government. Any types of marinas, recreational programs, if revenue is generated from them. Convention center revenue is another one, stadiums and arenas that you might have. So those are some fair amount of examples of enterprise funds.
Yeah, well, Kelly, I think the really interesting thing when I was a city manager down in Wimberley is one of the few local municipalities in Texas that do not have an ad valorem tax. Wimberley runs on 100% sales tax, which really makes it interesting when you're trying to calculate your budget. And actually, there's a couple of companies out there like Exact Tax or HDL that will really help try to give you some of that sales tax data. But I always found it was really great to rely on some of those sources of information to be able to calculate our budget, particularly where we weren't receiving any property tax coming back in. When I was there, we did our first certificate of obligation, which the city had never done before. So we did guarantee the certificate through property taxes, but we set the tax rate at 0. And so that explaining that to the community and things like that was a real interesting process. I know it may not be a topic that we necessarily had on the list, but how do cities really effectively communicate to their citizens? What are some tricks and tactics that you've used in the past?
We talk about your budget hearings and participation. You can have community meetings. You can have town hall meetings. You can get it out through the information out that you want through your website. You can always do surveys from citizens. There are many ways that you can involve the community. And in fact, you should. It's their money. So I think Wimberley is a great example of when you're considering revenue, that is absolutely a retail heavy and a tourism driven town. And so a place like Wimberley that would be very high on the sales tax side would be very different than a bedroom community that is almost solely reliant on property taxes.
It's definitely something that people should consider when they're talking about development in town. Is that sales tax money that comes in is very important to lower that property tax a lot of times. Not many places are going to get down to zero, but all that money coming in can definitely supplant some of those taxes that the individuals are paying on their residents.
Absolutely.
Kelly, tell us some thoughts on planning the expenditures. That's always the most difficult part, coordinating that through all those departments. And what are appropriate expenditures for municipalities and budgets?
Sure. It can be difficult coordinating that across departments. Typically, the coordination begins in the spring. Every department head would come up with proposed expenditures for their department, and that can be done in many ways. But the things that department heads are going to look at during expenditure planning are things such as personnel costs, which of course are salaries, benefits, any type of COLA adjustments, capital improvement plans or capital improvements are something that department heads are going to be looking at. And typically you want them to align with the town's capital improvement plan that prioritizes the city's infrastructure needs. Debt service is something else we look at when we're, itemizing our expenditures, payments for bonds or certificates of obligation, contingency and reserves. Are we maintaining healthy fund balances to meet our policy thresholds? And are we preparing for emergencies? The budget in expenditures must include itemized expenditures. So there has to be a clear comparison between the proposal and the prior year's spending. Project listings. So those would be estimated costs for major initiatives or for capital projects, financial statements, outstanding obligations, cash on hand in each fund, revenues that were received in the prior year, revenues that will be available for the upcoming year, and then, of course, your estimated tax rate that you need in order to fund these expenditures.
And Kelly, one of the things you were talking about for expenditures is personnel costs. If there's maybe a new elected official coming into their first budget season or a citizen maybe listening to this, what's the typical percentage that most cities are spending on personnel versus all those other things?
It really depends on the city, but certainly the majority of your expenditures are personnel costs in most cities.
All right. Well, Kelly, the interesting thing that I've found in some communities that I've consulted in is sometimes they don't even have a capital improvement fund or, some of the separate funds set up. For those communities, it's always trying to strategize and talk about how they can start investing in their capital improvements and maneuvering their funds to be more strategic oriented as opposed to just operational oriented year over year. As we're talking about examples of funds that can be set up in a typical budget and then how cities might go about doing that, can you give some advice to them on that process?
Sure. I mean, generally speaking, there are about seven funds or so that most people will deal with or know about. General fund being one. General fund is going to include your administration, your mayor, your council, your city manager, city secretary, finance, which would be your accounting, your payroll services, legal services, your city attorneys, any litigation costs. Public safety falls under your general fund. Police, fire, municipal court, public works, street and drainage can fall under there. Facilities upkeep, parks and recreation, planning and development is typically under your general fund. Library services. Another fund that is quite common is your enterprise fund, and that's for your water and sewer operations. The treatment, the distribution, the billing, sanitation services would fall under your enterprise fund. Then you'd have your debt service fund, which is the principal and the interest payments on your bonds or your certificates of obligation. You'd have your capital projects fund, which is what you were just talking about, Mike, infrastructure upgrades, facility construction, equipment purchases. You'll have special revenue funds that would include things like hotel occupancy taxes, street maintenance sales tax could go under there, child safety fees, grants. Maybe you have some CDBG grants or some ARPA grants. There's many types of grants that cities have. You'd also have an internal services and transfers fund, which would be your IT services, your interfund transfers, your contingency reserves, insurance and benefits. So those are basically the funds that municipalities or local governments are going to be working with when you're constructing a budget. But what you want to do is you want to make certain that your funds and your expenditures align with your comprehensive plan and your capital improvement plan.
Kelly, municipalities and most government, it's only a 1-year budgeting cycle. So every year we come through this budget season and we have to make priorities for the next year. A lot of them are in the October to September fiscal year, at least in Texas. So even though we're budgeting for 1 year at a time, we obviously have things that are prioritized out, a vision for the future of our cities. How do you align all that with a 1-year budgeting cycle with maybe something that we're trying to get accomplished in the next 5 to 10 years?
Sure. Strategic alignment is super important when you are considering your budget. Comprehensive plan integration is important. So by doing that, you're tying your budget priorities to your long-term goals, such as growth management, maybe economic development. Maybe you have downtown revitalization that's part of your comprehensive plan. Many things can be part of your comprehensive plan, but the important thing is aligning that with your budget. And that is important because your community is involved in your comprehensive plan. They're involved in the construction of it. So it's important to always keep that in mind when you're planning your budget. Another thing that can help with strategic alignment is community engagement. So although your citizens may have had input on your comprehensive plan, you really want to stress the value of public input during this time through surveys, through town halls, through budget workshops, any way you can get the community involved. It is so important. People seem to digest the end of the year budget better when there is community engagement and involvement, and the acceptance of the budget and the rates always seems to be more favorable when you do have the strategic alignment and the community engagement. And then finally, with strategic alignment, performance metrics are really important. So possibly you're looking at outcome-based budgeting, or you want your departments to track the effectiveness of certain programs or certain things that they had in their budget. If you're able to use performance metrics in your budget, that is a wonderful way to strategically align what you're supposed to do or what the citizens want you to do or what your comprehensive plan says you're supposed to do with the money. And one thing that people do is they use outcome-based budgeting, which is actually measuring the goals and the strategies that you had outlined for your specific department in your specific city.
All right. Well, this is some great information, Kelly. And I think as we're discussing these really important topics, one thing I always see in some cities is they look at budgeting as either a process or a document. I think in my experience, the more you look at budgeting as an action, you can really stay on top of making sure the revenue that's coming in is on point, but also the expenditures that are going out are targeted. And throughout the year, as circumstances change, crisis happens, maybe things that you didn't plan on have came up. If you're looking at your budget as more of an action item, then it's a living, breathing thing that you're constantly adapting with. You don't set the budget and then just every year by year, things fall exactly the way that you hope they will. I mean, it's something you have to be intimately involved in, especially at the city management level or finance director level. And even those department directors, as we're doing our recruitment side of what Clear Career Professionals does, the department directors who really take ownership of their individual department budgets and understand how to shape those and let those be the most impactful things that are going on in their organization for their people that then resort back out to the impacts on the community. I think there's a really powerful tool and synergy there. And so kind of speaking of that, when you're looking at the budget and the operational efficiency that comes through the process, and then what happens when the budget becomes the action, what does that look like?
Sure. So with the operational efficiency, there's many things that you can do to make certain that you are being efficient with taxpayer dollars that come in. One thing that I find super important, in fact, I've been talking with James Hopper about this with Clear lately, is exploring cost-saving collaborations with counties, school districts, or neighboring cities. It is so common for local governments to operate on an island. And it's amazing the things that we can do with our counties or our cities or our school districts with simple memorandums of understanding. And so when we're sharing the services and the partnerships, we're also sharing the expenses, which ultimately leads to operational efficiency for the agency. The other thing that you can look at on the efficiency side is possibly grant matching and leverage. So you want to identify opportunities to be able to stretch local dollars through grant applications. Technology and innovation are important in operational efficiency. You want to budget for upgrades that improve service delivery when you can or improve transparency. Some examples I can think of would be online permitting is an extremely efficient way to run, a building permitting department, possible financial dashboards, anything that improves your efficiency through technology and innovation should at the very least be looked at.
Yeah, and Kelly, as we're talking more and more about what Clear does, Clear is so much more than just a recruitment firm. We do a lot of government consulting, and I know that you are part of the teams that do some of the comprehensive planning for cities. Certainly, helping them in achieving some of their strategic objectives and budgeting. But even more recently, we've moved into providing some financial assistance as far as bank recs and journal entries and the budget reconciliation process with a couple of retired finance directors who came on board to really impact those communities who need it, whether that's working with Encode software or FundView software, which we love FundView software. We love what they're going on there too. But, I think if you can talk a little bit more about what are some things that if people reach out to Clear and really want your assistance that you'd be comfortable helping them with?
I'm super proud that Clear is able to get in communities and we change our scope from time to time when we identify a new need out there, a need that we were not aware was so prevailing. So kudos to Clear for stepping up and trying to fill the voids and fill the needs out there in the municipalities in particular. But we definitely have been known to provide interim work as finance directors. As you say, we're doing some contract work for cities, and that seems to be financially feasible for cities, especially some of these smaller cities. Rather than hiring the position as a whole, they can actually hire a contract person through Clear that will do the majority of the work virtually, but is definitely able to cost the taxpayer a lot less versus bringing in a full-time employee who you then have to pay retirement benefits and insurance benefits, et cetera.
Yeah, and people ask me all the time why our costs are so much more effective for being able to provide the service that we do. And I think that comes from our team. Most of the people involved in our company have been in the specific roles in government that we're assisting with or managing the topics that we're assisting cities with. And I think at our core, we have that core of service. We're not just coming in, with a corporate model where we're going to try to maximize profit. Our profit is mostly in the impact we make for our communities. And so I think that's one thing I love about our company and just kind of how we approach every situation. I know you and I worked on a project with the city of Devine recently where, they had some positions that dropped off quickly, didn't have a ton of budget space to hire a firm. And we kind of negotiated and worked with them to provide, a deep service. And they got, I think 4 really great candidates that are going to really help carry that city forward. And for us, being people who are retired from government, we love having that impact. And so I think if you can talk a little bit to that, I know there's a number of things that you could be doing now with your career, and you focus so much more on helping communities.
Absolutely. That is the entire reason that I joined Clear. We started with 3 of us, you, me, and Kent Myers talking, and just really trying to dissect what we could do better, how we could be more efficient, and how we could serve through Clear by using our combined experience. And it has been such a pleasure to be able to help some of these communities that are in need, bring them back up to where they need to be, get them people hired, get people trained, help out in the interim, and then watch them fly. That is such a rewarding experience.
Well, Michael and Kelly, as we wrap up here, I'd like to hear from both of you. You've both sat in the big chair in different cities. There's a bunch of finance directors and city managers right now, maybe panicking, maybe a little nervous. Beyond the tips that you've already provided today, what can you say to get them through this last little hurdle of budget season?
I know what my number one tip would be. Be transparent. Sometimes there's things you don't want to talk about and you don't want to say or you're not proud of, but be transparent, because it's amazing how transparency obviously builds trust, but it lends so much credibility to you, to your position, to the budget process. You're all in this together. You, the staff, the elected officials, the community. And when everybody is forthcoming and transparent with each other, and you understand you've got a process, you've got to work through it, and ultimately you want to try to provide the best bang for the buck for the taxpayer. And so I think that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, James. And this has been a really great topic and conversation. Pivoting off of what Kelly was saying there, most of the really high performing city managers that we've had an opportunity to work with and around understand this concept. When we're talking about leadership and culture, I think far too often we bring that internally and we think about just the city team or the city staff, and that leadership really resonates throughout the entire community. And so as you're, building your budget, it is one of the most powerful actions a city is doing, when they're collecting revenue from their citizens and then using that revenue to impact the quality of life. And so those effective leaders who can get in, definitely be transparent, but really, instead of just checking the boxes as far as communication goes and saying, well, we had a public hearing, really taking the extra step to go out and meet one-on-one with community groups, really engaging those folks in conversation and listening. I think a lot of times we as city managers fall in this bubble where we feel like we know what's best. When we fall into that particular category, it makes it really difficult for our citizens because we're not the ones that are actually experiencing what's happening on the ground most of the time. Listening to those citizens and going, hey, here are things that are impacting our life. And then how do we shape the budget well in advance because we've listened to really have the highest impact?
That's great advice, Michael and Kelly. I appreciate that. And I'm sure that'll help some people in these positions as they go through this very difficult, very stressful time each year. We want to thank everybody for listening today and look for you on the next one.
Happy budgeting, everyone.